Alright, I wanted to run through all of the stuff that was due week 3, just for grins, try to make this faster. Alright, so the in-class exercise. This week we are basically going over displacement maps, in the process of uploading videos, so these will be populated eventually. Projects to do, basically, I provided you a little head, which I also use as a demo object. It's a character of me. Turn me into an old person, or a fantasy creature, or otherwise do something weird, silly, and creative to my head. It doesn't need to be super fancy. I really just want to make sure that you guys can actually use displacement maps. I'm focusing more on, does the displacement map work, compared to, did you do something really pretty with my head? But feel free to do really weird. I had someone turn me into a devil before, which is pretty darn funny. Anywho. What to submit? One screenshot of your sculpt in whatever program you sculpted in, so that should be either ZBox, not a thing, ZBrush, or Mudbox. Submit also the actual displacement map that you use, like the file texture. It should be a TIFF or a EXR. I prefer TIFFs just they're easier to look at, but it doesn't really matter to me. And then render the head with the displacement map. Please do add walls and a floor and use either a physical sky or a dome light with an HDRI. Don't just use a unmapped white dome light. And make sure that the lighting actually shows off the model. There is a setting in physical sky. All my demo things. There is a setting in the physical sky that you can change. Dear Lord, where am I going? Sorry, go into physical sky, go into color. Azimuth, or however you say this, is the direction of the sky, so that'll change basically the position of the lighting. But yes. And then you can do something weird with the head if you want, like put it on a head or steak or a platter. And there is no additional texture required as long as it's, you know, some generic shader. That's fine. I really only care about the texture maps for this. That's pretty much it. Don't zip any of this, just submit 3... Actually... Zip. Just submit those 3 individual files. That's all I want. Please don't zip stuff unless I ask for it. I get previews and learn, and then having to zip things, I have to download it and then export it, and it's like a whole thing. But anywho, so that's pretty much week 3. It really is just going over displacement maps. Disclaimer, if there is going to be an assignment that's going to cause weird technical issues, it's probably going to be this one. After this week, if you never want to make a displacement map again, don't worry about it. If you have issues with it, please let me know. I know a lot of troubleshooting gets like, I don't know. It's hard to troubleshoot displacement maps, but if you have issues, let me know. I'm usually sort of flexible with the grading. If you've like tried a bunch of stuff and you can't get it to work, I'll just kind of look at the sculpt, etc., etc. But anywho, later problems. All right, so that was the in-class thing. You still have. Where am I going? You still have reaction crit due and the in-class crit for discussion boards. And I've also moved the in-class exercise due dates, or will be moving them until noon the day after class, because it seems like everyone was having issues getting them done at midnight, and there's frankly no sense in you guys staying up till 3 in the morning doing something when I'm not going to wake up until 6 or 7 and grade stuff anyway. So, anywho, sculpting assignment ties into the weekly. Goal of this is basically twofold. Do something nicer looking for a displacement map, make your own object to put it on, pay more attention to what you're actually sculpting, and also come out of this with, you know, a nice looking object. I'm pretty flexible on the object you want to use, as long as it makes sense to actually use displacement maps. And I go over that a little bit in the video. I've provided some more examples here. Actual requirements, basically pick an object that's soft and squishy. If you're fishing for something you don't know what to do, pillows or like cat beds or like squishy blankets, stuff like that, make good options. You could do one of those weird upholstered chairs with like the buttons in it, and they make like a diamond pattern. So you could do any of those things. Puffy winter jackets, all really, really good. And again, you can pretty much do anything with fine detail. If you want to try your own hand, I do want you to make the model yourself. So if you want to do a head or hands or feet or whatever, like that's fine, but make your own head, hands, and feet. You do a lizard face. I really don't care. Like I said, just make sure it makes sense to use a displacement map. Gonna make your base mesh in Maya. And then you are going to use either Mudbox or ZBrush to sculpt in displacement maps. Don't use Substance Painter for this, and I'm actually just going to omit this entirely as a thing. I prefer you use ZBrush. I just think it's a more powerful program, more versatile in the long run, and Mudbox is kind of gross. This is an oversimplification, but Mudbox to me is like Paint, like Microsoft Paint to Photoshop. That being said, Mudbox is still way more powerful than like Microsoft Paint, but it's just like ZBrush is so much more powerful and so much more versatile that it's just like insane. I think it's more valuable to learn ZBrush. Anywho, and then texture and render your objects in Maya. So model expectations, I do expect that whatever you do for the sculpt actually looks nice. The in-class was kind of like a silly little thing where you're just like, do something weird, turn me into a devil. This should actually be you trying to render an object accurately with, nice detail in it, all that good stuff. Make it a portfolio piece if you can. You are required to have displacement maps. If you want to throw in a normal or bump map in addition, you're welcome to. Displacement maps are required. And for this one, I would like you to smooth the model with the week3 key. Mostly just to make sure you can do the settings if you need to. And again, it's not only about having a good displacement map, it's about how well you capture the detail in whatever you're doing. I've included a buttload of random examples of just different cushions. I've also have this weird model that I sculpted a while ago for a person. This is not a displacement map, this is just in the model, but this would be an example of like skin detail where I've gone through and added, a bunch of random, wrinkles and stuff like that. So if you're doing, this is like obviously really extreme. It's supposed to be like 13 hours, something crazy to sculpt that, but something like the horns, I've gone through and I've added some extra detail into that if you're actually curious. You see the wireframe of this, it's very dense mesh. But anyway, so that's basically that. I'll pull up one or two, and I did not actually look at the any of these examples. I found them from a long time ago, so just a quick example of also how to actually use Sketchfab and like look at it if you happen to want to look at any of these. When this loads, if this loads, blah blah blah. Alright, well that's loading, I'll come back to that. Here's a random pair. This I actually just did all of this procedurally. One thing to note is organic stuff. This whole assignment is pretty much about organic stuff, right? Like your cushions, which they don't fold symmetrically. Fruit. So this is all lumpy, and make sure that your objects reflect that. Do pay attention to that kind of stuff. I wouldn't expect symmetry to be used on like a fruit or a cushion. Random note. So anywho, what to submit for this? 3 renders of your object with no displacement on it. I just want the head. And then 3 renders of your object with your displacement map on it. These must be in the same position as your original renders. Naming convention and all of this good stuff here. And then if you could submit a Maya zip folder of only the following things. 1. Maya file set up to be rendered. This is the one that you're going to use to render these images above. Naming convention, thusly. Include your displacement map or displacement maps. Just the image files was fine. They should be in your source images folder. The file where you sculpted your thing for displacement mapping. So this should be either a ZBrush or Mudbox file. Any reference images you used, and I will take off points for extra stuff in your project folder. So I don't want like 7 versions of your lit scene. I don't want 7 versions of your sculpt. I want the final version of everything, and I want nothing else in your scene. And as a note, do not put the renders, these renders here, all of these, in the project folder. I would like them uploaded separately as individual files. If you zip them into this thing here, I will deduct points from your assignment. I'm not gonna lie, I am not going to look at this unless there's something suspicious or you need stuff troubleshooted. That's not a word. Troubleshot? Unless I need to troubleshoot something. I am mostly just going to look at the renders, or if something like looks weird, I might go in and look at your texture files or something like that. But I'm gonna look at these, and these will load in Learn. If they're zipped in here, again, I have to download your zip file and then export everything, or unzip it, and I don't want to do that. It's purely me being lazy, but y'all need to submit stuff in the good formats. So I am asking specifically for 7 uploads, basically 6 images and a zip file when you upload. That's fine, don't worry about that. Grading stuff, we're looking at, depending on what you're sculpting, overly symmetrical stuff or like a fruit. If your displacement map is like really low res, it's like super fuzzy and bizarre. Stuff if it's not working or didn't render correctly. And this one I'll be a little flexible on. I know displacement maps, for some reason this is the one assignment that like everyone has explode on them. So if you've been making like a legitimate effort to get your stuff rendered and you've like been in contact with me and we can't figure out what's wrong, I'm not gonna like automatically fail you for the project, but like be in contact with me, right? Like if you just turn in something and you're like, couldn't get the renders to work, lol, and then there's like no other communication, I'm still gonna give you a bad grade for that, right? Because you haven't been in contact with me. I'm usually pretty lenient as long as you're in contact with me about what's happening, and that's, I find, I do a lot of freelance stuff, that's, I find, as long as you're upfront with your clients, that tends to be how things work. But anywho, so middle of the road, no technical issues with the displacement map. And then it's just mostly looking at this would be like the overall sculpt is kind of lacking in detail or not very accurate. It looks like maybe not a lot of time was put into it, that kind of thing. High grades, no technical issues. You have a nice looking sculpt. And then this is where points for you get points for like doing something more challenging. Like skin would be more challenging than fruit, which is like a lumpy little fruit, or cloth texture or something like that would be more complex. You get more points for doing like a puffy jacket with stitch marks than you would just like a pillow with 3 folds in it. And then again, overall composition and lighting and all that good stuff. I started also just making a list of random stuff I will deduct points off for. I will be more stickler about this in the future. But yeah, so here's just my list of sort of random things. Like wrong format, if you don't submit renders, if you have extra stuff in your project folder, this is all the points that will be taken off of that stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. This has loaded, hooray! We have a just good example of a bunch of different cushions here. And really quick, I actually just want to show you guys how to use Sketchfab. So if you go down to the bottom right, you will see this little pancake stack, and that is your model inspector. You can open that, and you can look at a bunch of different stuff. So you can see like the wireframe, which is pretty interesting. You can look at matte cap, which is basically just going to apply this default silvery material to stuff, and you can look at matte cap plus surface, and that's going to show all of the sort of displacement and normal maps and whatnot that they put on. And in this case, Sketchfab actually does not really support displacement maps, so what you're going to be looking at here is a normal map, but you can see kind of the detail that I would expect here, right? So I mean, you have, even in this cushion, they do have a little bit of that sort of lumpiness sculpted in. And you can see again that it's not, it's not a symmetrical cushion. These folds are different looking, and just sort of different. I thought this was a nice example because it just shows different details and stuff, right? So like the seam lines is really nice. They've gone through, excuse me, added a bump map for the texture of the cloth, which is nice, and they have different textures on each cushion. So you guys can go do that. You don't need to put that in like the displacement map. If you want to use a bump for that, that's fine. But like the wrinkles will be done with the displacement map. So it's just a good example of different types of pillows, different shapes of pillows, nice different texturing, that kind of thing. I particularly like this ridiculous little beanbag chair. So I think they actually simmed a lot of these. I think they at least simmed this beanbag chair. It looks like a sim. But just a good example. So I have a bunch of these if you guys want to pick around, look at those. So that is the sculpting assignment. The other stuff that you have due, this is kind of like a heavy week for, so like hopefully this assignment itself won't take you a super long time, hopefully, because it mostly is messing around, just like playing with sculpting and just exporting a map. So you have 2 assignments for week 3, or for your final. One of them is the room bones. So this is going to be take your 3D floor plan and refine it. Basically what you should be shooting for with this is finished. If you imagine walking into an empty apartment, you're looking at a place, there's no furniture, nothing else in it. Think of the stuff you see in there, right? Like there's walls, there's molding, there's doors, there's doorknobs, there's electrical outlets, little plates for the electrical outlets, that kind of thing. Excuse me. So I'm not looking for, curtains, draperies, desk. It's literally like if you removed all of the things, the loose objects from the room, what would be left? That's the stuff you guys are going to be making. So you want to, again, just sort of go through for the corners of the walls, anything that is sort of a single piece, model it thusly. So there's no perfect 90-degree angles in rooms, bane of my existence, but make sure that you have, bevels or little rounded areas on the walls. You could, if you wanted to, add molding, so you don't need to do that. I know a lot of the time, like, between the walls and the floor, there will be molding. So, like, right, if you'd have a separate floor piece, and then walls clipping through it, and then as long as you cover that with molding, I don't really care. But if it's anything, like vertical walls and stuff that you're seeing and it looks like a really hard edge, make it not a really hard edge. Even for game models and stuff, just add a bevel. Like, even like a small little bevel would do it. Sort of miscellaneous extra stuff. You can add extra stuff if you need to. I'm partial to like archways and sloping roofs, stuff like that. It makes things way more interesting. Again, make sure you have your windows and doors. Make sure also that your walls have thickness. So if I am looking out your window, I don't want to just see a thin paper plane of nothingness. Like, I want nice, thick windows. They don't need to be thick, but they should, not be a plane. And then, again, looking at stuff like the windows and doors, most times they have trim. Like, if you look in a house, I don't think I've seen a house in a very long time where a window and a door didn't have trim. It usually costs extra to get rid of windows and of trim on windows and doors. Obviously, if your house is like a low-tech mud hut with a wooden door, you can probably skip that. I stand by that, but that's a really weird way to put that. Modern stuff probably have some kind of trim. If you're doing Victorian something, probably going to have some kind of trim. I know a lot of you guys are actually doing pirate stuff, which is interesting. I feel like that would also probably have trim. But anywho. So, the door should be completely finished. So, does your door have panels? Is there, it's like a stained glass window in it? The doorknob and the hinges, like that stuff should all be done and completely modeled. And again, don't forget about stuff like baseboards or like molding on the bottom of the floors. Crown molding on the upper parts of the wall. You could do interesting other random molding details, like what's it called? Chair rail molding, where it's like the halfway molding. It's like in the middle of the room. You could do something like that. And it's kind of a thing people a lot of times will do in like Victorian rooms, where they'll have like wallpaper on the bottom and a different wallpaper on the top, whatever. And again, make sure everything is to scale. And then, I might omit that as a thing. Unless I actually get rid of this, assume that you have to do it. But also, you're going to want to block in the 3 objects, and that can be like super, super rough. When I say block it in this case, I mean like, just get their overall shape. Like if you're making, a wagon wheel or something like that, make like a weird cylinder that's the size of your wagon wheel. If you're doing, what else are some people doing? I guess some people are doing like desks are always good. If you're doing a desk, lock in like the shape of that desk specifically in the room and like make it sort of fit in place. And then you can use that to build off of later. And then theoretically, a lot of you guys already have some of this stuff blocked in from the stuff that's due, I guess, tomorrow. I'm making this Sunday, so the stuff that's due on week 2. You guys will actually have a lot of that stuff in, so you can just sort of shift it around or move it if you need to fit the scene. And then you're going to want to light your scene in 2 different ways. And I'll go over more specifics of sort of how to do both of these later. Right now, just sort of like take your best guess, basically. See what you can come up with, and then we can work on refining that later. You'll know what to look for. I find it's always helpful to have done something, and then when you hear about it, you're like, ah, yes, that issue. Like, this is how I could go back and specifically apply this to my project. So this doesn't need to be super fancy. I'm mostly just looking for broad sweeping differences. And in this case, since it should be a finished room, I do want, ceilings, so don't do the thing where you just take the ceiling off your room and like put a light above it. So do 2 different lights. for your scene, both day and night. They'll be both for the final anyway, and render with 2 interesting camera angles from each light scheme. So basically, what you should submit is 2 renders for day lighting and 2 renders for night lighting. They do not need to have the same camera angles, so you can do 4 distinct camera angles for all of these, and just label them with your last name, underscore, and then if it's day or night, and the number of the PNG. And also throw in a Maya file with your floor plan in it. And if you could just remind me in the submission comments what space you're making, right? If you're doing like a, pirate hut versus a 18th century something versus like a hospital, just let me know. In terms of actual grading for this, what I'm looking for is sort of lower grades are going to be, it's missing a lot of room features, and when I say significant room features, I mean, again, the stuff that, like, if you walk into an apartment and there are no doors anywhere, including the bathroom, like, that would be cause for concern. If there's no doors in your room, I'll take points off for that, right? Like, if your windows have no volume, like, I would take points off for that. That kind of thing. If you're missing extensive features, and then your day or night lighting makes it super hard to see the objects. Middle of the road grading is going to be, it's nice blocking, like what you have is good. You're still missing a few features, like maybe you have a door, but you don't have hinges on the door, like the doorknob's not quite done, that kind of thing. And then there's like no difference really between day and night lighting. Good is everything's done, and the lighting schemes are clearly different, and you have objects that are you can see objects clearly in both of them. That's pretty much that. This one I've not really done one of the little what I'll take points off for. It's basically just submit everything in the correct format and submit all the renders, that kind of thing. I might go back and add that, but anywho. So that is the room bones here. The other thing that is due is I've opened this twice because I'm a dingus. The hero objects. You have 1 hero object due. And I would like to clarify, actually, really quickly, that somebody asked on the Discord what the schedule for the hero objects was. And I realized after the fact that I'd worded things a little bit weird. So this schedule at the end of the syllabus should be accurate, and I've kind of color-coded everything, so like the hero models are all, like any modeling for the final is this weird pale green color, and any texturing is this fluorescent blue color. So what you're basically going to want to look for here is week 2, sorry, what have I done here? I've done something strange. You have a hero model that is due on week 4, you have a hero model that is due week 5, and you have another hero model due week 6. So starting week 4, you're going to have a hero, one of those like 3 main objects due every single week until they're done. After week 4, 5, okay, starting week 5, there's going to be no weekly assignments, so the pace is going to swap to doing stuff for your final. So, what am I saying? By the time you're watching this video, you should already be halfway done with the weekly assignments. The only other 2 is the sculpting from ZBrush and the texturing of the pen that you made in week 1. After that, it's literally just working on your final. So basically, it's going to just, spiral from here, and you can see kind of how it breaks down. I think there was confusion. I named stuff a little bit differently in the Blackboard Learn. So right now, I'm calling Hero Model. Hero Model is basically the main, fanciest object that you're making. The only real difference between this and the other main objects that you're making is this one is going to have a turntable rendered as part of its grade. So I would pick the sort of fanciest one out of your objects, basically. I actually don't really care if it's and you can do any of your main objects, really, I don't really care. But make sure it's the one that you want to render a turntable for. Apart from that, the requirements are pretty much exactly the same for all of them. So, pretty much anytime you see something with like hero object, just assume that it's one of your 3 main objects. And theoretically, they should all sort of tie together, but really as long as you're submitting a hero object for your hero object assignments and texturing one of them as you go, you should be fine. I think the only real caveat there is at some point I have the turntable due, and one of the texturing assignments is sort of like gearing towards doing a turntable. So as long as you have this, your texture's done in time to render this, you should be fine. Hopefully that makes sense. Please let me know if you have any questions. Simple, like I said, oversimplification. If it's a hero object, model, or texture, pick one of your objects and go for it. Anywho. So basically for this, you're just going to go through, model the entire object. Again, pay attention to dimensions. Stuff should be modeled to scale. And you also want to look at minute details, stuff like screws. You know, if there's... Think of it as the pen, basically. It's recreating the pen assignment with the much details you can, but with a different object, right? So if it's like, for the pen, I was like, model that little ball at the tip of the pen. You want to do the same thing with your hero objects. If there's like a little rubber nub in something, you should model that little rubber nub on that kind of stuff. Not really a requirement, just, you know, depending on how you like working, it might be nice to UV individual pieces as you go rather than doing them all at once. And just as a general rule of thumb, I said this a lot with the pen, if it comes apart or is made of different materials, you can model those individually and put them together. And when I say you can model them individually, I mean I would recommend modeling them individually. I think it makes texturing a little bit easier. It also means if you want to, you could explode your object and do sort of like breakdown of how it was made. What I don't want is obvious clipping. If the clipping is hidden, like you have, you know, the head of a screw, and you sort of like butt that up to your model, and then the little stalk of the screw with threading is clipping through your model, I don't really care, you're never going to see that. What I don't want is something like, if you're looking at like a DSLR camera, I guess for some reason this is the only thing I can think of. What I don't want to see is like the lens for this just clip, like a cylinder just clipping through the model, right? Like that should be modeled separately. And if it's made of different materials, so like if you have, you know, metal glued onto plastic, as far as I'm concerned, you can model those if you want as separate pieces. They were made as separate pieces, they're just glued together now. But again, it's completely a preference of how you like to work for stuff like that. It's just sort of how I think about stuff. Like if it was made separately in the real world, you can break it apart and make it separately in the fake world of CG if you want to. Anywho, so you should be UVing these objects, that is actually a requirement. Make sure all your UVs are scaled reasonably and not overlapping. I think I actually have a video somewhere or a demonstration about what UVs look like. But basically, if you apply a UV checker texture to your entire object, the scales, or the little squares, should look the same, be the same size everywhere. So if you were doing something like this DSLR camera, like I wouldn't want to see super itty-bitty scales on most of this, and then like giant, why do I keep saying scales? And giant squares here. Or what's probably more likely is giant scales all over this thing and like really tiny, tiny scales on this button. Make sure they're all nice uniform sizes. So that's that. And I do expect something more than an automatic map, right? So go back and you start with an automatic map, but stitch the pieces together, hide the seams as best you can. Try to optimize your UVs as much as possible. And then you're going to put your scene, put your object in your little locked-in room and render it. So theoretically, you should be doing the room bones before this, ideally. And then have again, basically have a finished model with as many complete UVs as pretty much. Yeah. And I don't know why I put this in twice. That was redundant. Alright, so what you should have is one render with your object and your scene in daylighting, and one render with night lighting. So again, this is like in whatever state your room is in. It would be ideal if this was in the finished room bones that I just talked about. If all you have is block when you do this, that's fine. Naming conventions. And then you should also do 3 or more renders of your object in a well-lit scene showing off your model. So like actually make just like a nice little place to put the model itself. Set up like a 3-point lighting system, something like that. Put in walls and a floor, all that good stuff. And render it. trying to make the object look as pretty as possible. Also have it as big a frame as you can. And again, I recommend sort of one shot of the whole thing, and then if you want to zoom in on particular areas you really like, you can do that for the rest of them. Include a Maya file with the names of the objects in it. I'm sorry, that made no sense. Maya file with the object in it. A zip file for any reference you used for that object. And remind me, again, in the submission comments, what space you're making. So I would like these to actually all be separate, if you could. So this should be basically 5 individual renders with an individual Maya file and then a zip file. I do not want all of these top 3 things in this zip file. You can make them separate. Anywho, so how this is graded, basically, if your object isn't finished, that's going to be not great. Your model is super full of technical issues like n-gons, things without volume, non-manifold edges, that kind of stuff. Middle of the road's going to be kind of like decent looking object. There's a few technical errors, some small n-gons here and there. Nothing glaringly crazy, but maybe it could have had some more detail in it. Good grade is going to be overall highly detailed. Extremely few or no technical errors. And then again, this is kind of where I look at overall complexity of the object again. So doing something like a fancy old cash register with like a bunch of buttons, or like a weird ornate phone or something like that, is going to get more points than doing something like a, I don't know, like a really basic vase or like a mug or something like that. And I've been going through all the comments on people's stuff and being like, hey, you shouldn't, maybe pick something a little bit more complex, but if you have not read those, you should be reading them. But, that could potentially, in this case, like factor into the grade a little bit. You definitely should be doing stuff more complex than a mug for your final object. But anyway, so that's pretty much that, and I think that was pretty much everything. So I have been putting these little notes on your hero object. This is hero object, or hero model is like the first hero object. Hero object 1 is the second hero object. This is due in 2 weeks. So this is just a reminder. There's nothing that you have to do for this. I just put it in there again just to kind of remind you guys. Like if you look at week 4, that's when that's actually assigned, right? So that'll be due the next week. And then I have the 2 more reminders here, being like, hey, you have a bunch more things due in 2 weeks. Don't forget about them if you want to start working on them early. So that's all these are. If I've not linked a Google Doc to something, it is not an actual assignment. So hopefully that all makes sense. That was probably a very long and convoluted video. Do let me know if you have any questions.